A lot of news this week, including Intel posting a driver update that improves Intel Arc performance by double digits in a lot of cases and triple digits in one particular case. They get something like 270%. Generally means goes from broken to not broken anymore. And also they added Palworld to their patch notes, which probably a good thing considering it is somehow one of the most successful games on Steam ever by concurrent player count. Further still, OpenAI wants to fab its own chips, which would be a massive piece of news if they're able to successfully do that. And we'll recap some of the GPU reviews that we just got through. And by the way, there's a lot more reviews coming up next week, and it's not just GPUs. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace, and visiting squarespace.com/gamersnexus will give you 10% off your first purchase with them. We've built a number of our own websites with Squarespace, where we list catastrophic PC hardware failures to inform subscribers of those failures. We also built our store website with Squarespace using its built-in e-commerce tools, and of course, we built a website for our CEO, Snowflake, because she demanded our audience know who really runs the show. Get to the core of your idea and spend less time on web design by signing up at squarespace.com/gamersnexus or click the link below. First up, we've published over 100 charts in the last 10 days or so between all the GPU reviews. So some quick updates for you all. We've been iterating on our GPU testing methodology. So we've been slowly adding new types of tests. It's not just games. It's been really cool. You can think of them kind of as like mini pilot episodes of new methodologies, which gives us some time to kind of refine the approach and not fully lock it in, so we can take community ideas and requests and try to implement those requests as we refine it. So anyway, a quick recap for all of you, just in case you're not planning to watch 5 GPU reviews sometime in the next few days. But the concepts and experiments we've added included a couple key things. One is latency testing, power efficiency testing, so FPS per watt for GPUs now, which is a concept we took from our CPU power efficiency testing that you all seem to really like. We're pulling it forward to GPUs. And then we also added Cyberpunk ray trace testing, so that's now in the suite. And we added Baldur's Gate 3 for the RX 7600 XT, which is kind of cringe to say it, but the low end of GPUs right now. It's more like mid-range, but it should be low end. It's just the price isn't at the low end. And then finally, we're working on adding Alan Wake 2. So some explainers on those concepts and why they're interesting, just kind of like a mini methodology piece talking about it to recap the key points from each of those and ignoring the products themselves. Latency testing, we ran that in the 4070 Super non-TI reviews. That was the first one of this cycle. Done latency testing in the past, but it's been a while. And we really think this is the future of some of our benchmarks. It's not replacing FPS, but for games with stupid high frame rate, particularly competitive titles or FPS titles, games where you want a lot of responsiveness, where you feel more connected to the game through the input of the mouse, those are the ones we think it's more important now, potentially, and we'll see how this evolves, to test and present latency and not just the frame rate. Because a lot of times what people are communicating when they say, I want a high FPS in Counter-Strike or in Rainbow Six Siege, what they're really talking about, especially past the refresh rate of the monitor, is the responsiveness of the input. Because there is a correlation between FPS and latency. As the FPS goes up, latency tends to go down, but it's not purely linear. And so that makes it interesting to test, because there may be certain advantages or disadvantages that different GPUs have for processing input, and it will deviate a little bit from a purely linear situation. So that's what we're going to look at. It also resets the scale. So instead of looking at 0 to 1,000 FPS, we're looking at something like 0 to 20 milliseconds, which kind of helps conceptualize it just at a human level. So that's the latency stuff. We are hoping to get into the 4080 Super review. If it doesn't make it in, then it's because right now we're considering the idea of just running a full standalone in-depth benchmark. So we'll look at that. And if it's not in there, then that's why. The other one we added was power efficiency testing. So we debuted this for the CPUs a while back with the Elmore PMD, but now we're running it for GPUs. So we debuted that in the 4070 Ti Super review. We'll show you a couple charts really quick from that review, where it started as FPS per watt. That is the same as saying frames per joule, and it's very similar in process to the CPU one. We'll be overhauling this as we continue iterating as well. Some of the maybe obvious current thoughts are doing FPS normalized or power normalized charts, which would allow us to further isolate for a variable and look at a true representation of what is the actual efficiency. Now, we probably want to test it uncapped too and unlimited because that's okay, here's the out of the box. But it gets complicated, obviously, because if they're producing different frame rates, it in a given period of time, it is a different unit of work intrinsically, which means the efficiency is not a pure one-to-one. So to get a pure one-to-one, we can do ISO FPS or ISO power, probably makes more sense for some of the cards. That scale it'll be interesting to talk about, because I can see situations where it becomes unintentionally unfair to certain cards, not necessarily vendors, but if you start constraining a 4090 a lot, it may be the case that because it doesn't have the power necessary to drive all those extra cores, the efficiency, I don't know right now if it'll be better or worse, but it could be significantly better or worse, depending on it. So anyway, we'll have a lot to think about and talk about with that stuff. We're focusing on efficiency testing a lot this year because, first of all, power cost is going up in a lot of places in the world. For us, we're fortunate it hasn't. We have a nuclear plant nearby. But for a lot of you in the audience, you've talked about extremely expensive power, especially in Europe. And so this will help people who are more sensitive to the power cost, because their power cost is higher than ours, to make decisions on maybe you actually do care if they're only 10% difference in performance, but the difference is, say, 20, 30% in what your effective power bill might be. You might care about that. So that's kind of the reason we're adding this in. Secondarily, manufacturers do listen a little bit to what reviewers are talking about. They don't make their manufacturing decisions based on us normally, but they do make some of the feature or the tuning decisions based on what the wider community discussion is. And so our hope is that if, as reviewers, we're talking more about power and efficiency, it might be the case that they start considering it more in how they're designing different tiers of product. Certainly we've seen that in the past, with GPUs and CPUs. I would say the influence of a review on the company standalone is a lot less. But as a community, they still will react to what the review community and their customer base is talking about. So that's kind of the big picture dreams of it. But the more realistic look is hopefully it helps some of you who care about the power cost make your decisions. Okay, Cyberpunk is the next one. So for this, I want to say on the efficiency too, a lot of you emailed us with ideas and concepts about it, so thank you. I've been reading them. Won't respond to all of them, but some of those concepts are getting kind of played around with mathematically to see how we want to introduce it. But Cyberpunk RT, we discovered in our testing that for our suite, Ultra and Medium have widely different results for AMD and NVIDIA percent differences, where Ultra significantly favors NVIDIA and Medium brings them a little closer together. And so instead of trying to pick, we're running both, because that we don't even have to think about what's fair. That is like, here's both numbers. You get to decide how much you care about Ultra settings. But that's in there now. Baldur's Gate 3 again added for lower end tests. And then finally, we're working on Alan Wake 2. So that is as fast as possible as I can recap all the cool stuff we're working on for GPUs. Really exciting time. I personally love doing this stuff. And as always, we will have a full methodology piece on this and a mega charts update with GPUs coming very soon, because we have so many GPUs in the charts, we can't fit them all now. We should have removed more probably from the 7600 XT review because you can't read them. But I'm going to run a mega charts thing on the website. We'll update you all. You'll be able to get all the data there without any vertical limitation like on YouTube. So if you want to support this, as always, please head over to store.gamersnexus.net. Consider grabbing one of these shirts. These are the limited ones that have the tour dates of the worst times of 2023's hardware industry on the back of it. And we're running these every year, so you can start your collection now. But we're low on this one. Charcoal Heather, I think, still has all sizes available in some quantities. Cotton is running low on several quantities and is out of a couple. But please head over to the store and grab one to support our efforts on this. Just for some context, for this last review cycle, I've been doing 20-plus-ish hours per day on the most recent ones. And Patrick on the team put in a lot of work getting latency refined. Mike's been running testing for the cards and kind of cycling them through. Jeremy has been doing a lot of the additional research and also creating content for after this, for when I feel dead, so that we can pick up. And then on the video side, Vitaly and Tim have been collecting the footage, putting the videos together. So it's been a huge team effort, and we really appreciate your support. So thanks everyone for that. Okay, first news story of the week. We've reported on huge gains for Intel GPUs in the past for Arc, and they are continuing. So the driver updates will continue until the morale improves. This update includes support for breakout success Palworld, or as a lot of people call it, Pokemon with guns. it has some massive uplift in specific games as well. Our latest review cycle didn't use these drivers, they weren't out yet publicly, but we're planning to rerun all the Intel Arc cards through with them, so we'll update you on what the performance is. But for Intel's official notes, they say driver revision 5186 or 5234 shows the largest uplift in Just Cause 4 at a staggering 268%, which means the game was probably functionally unplayable before this driver. That's still important though, because Intel's been exceptional at taking an objective approach to acknowledging past issues while improving for Arc. We've actually really appreciated and continually applauded the Arc team's candor and openness about saying, hey, we have problems. Some of them are pretty big, and we're trying to fix them, because it's a big departure from what you see with more incumbent parts of different companies and Intel, like the snake oil team. It's a welcome departure from that, believe it or not. So Intel's been really good about just acknowledging it and then trying to fix it. There are a couple really large improvements in Just Cause 3 as well, and Elex 2, Space Engineers, all high in the double digits of performance gain. Down from that, but still actually very respectable uplifts, are popular games like Warframe and Apex Legends, where respectively they saw 20% and 26% improvement. Overall, it's a pretty long list, so check it out if you're using an Arc GPU or considering one. Almost all of the titles here are DirectX 11, which makes sense because Intel initially focused its support on DX12 games, and then it's been going back to work on popular titles that use older APIs. So we sincerely hope that the next-gen Battle Mage cards come to market soon. The mid-range and lower-end part of the GPU market seriously needs a reality check. This is not just like inflation and whatever. There has been an actual price creep in relative performance. The ASP has gone up for a lot of these companies if you look at their public information, their earnings. So hopefully Intel helps reset that. Seriously troubling for AMD though, at the cost-effective range, if Intel can kind of lock in the non-enthusiast customer base. Where right now, at least for us, haven't really looked at other reviewers too much for Arc, but probably similar, I would guess, where our recommendation is these cards are definitely worth considering. If you're an enthusiast, you're kind of a core audience member, then go for it. But you need some patience, you need some troubleshooting experience, because every now and then you run into something that just doesn't work quite right, and you don't necessarily have the power to fix it other than swapping cards. So it's not quite in that like mainstream, would I recommend this to a family member who I am going to have to be tech support for? Probably not yet. But as soon as they can get there, Intel's going to be some pretty serious trouble for AMD and NVIDIA in the cheaper market, because Intel's probably more willing to go after that lower margin market just to establish itself, just like AMD did with the RX 580, for example. Okay, embarrassingly, one day after launch of the 4070 Ti Super, MSI posted a public press release. MSI said their, quote, R&D department discovered that the new Ventus model supercards were underperforming versus spec. As far as we're aware, no other vendors' cards are affected by the issue, and NVIDIA has not made any driver updates that would contribute meaningful performance uplifts since the review. The company has released 6 BIOS revisions for various Ventus and Gaming X model RTX 4070 Ti supercards specifically, claiming to improve performance to, quote, meet and exceed the expected benchmarks. Gonna hit X for doubt on the exceed part of that, but meeting it is an admirable objective. It's always good to try and meet expectations. The BIOS updates are available from MSI's website, and they can be installed with NV Flash, or you can use the installer they include. Be aware that flashing BIOS can cause components to break irrecoverably in the event of things like power loss, so don't flash the card during a thunderstorm or turn it off. In theory, this would affect any on-shelf GPUs that shipped prior to availability as well, and so it wouldn't just be reviewers who were affected, but possibly anyone who bought a day one card, or if the card's sitting on the shelf for a while. You should definitely just check and see if it's updated to the correct revision, which is 95034540F0, or whatever is sequentially after that in the sequence, and you should be fine. The company said this in its post, quote, after a deep investigation, our R&D department discovered that our new 4070 Ti Super 16GB Ventus 3X graphics card does not deliver its full potential. MSI sincerely acknowledges and apologizes for any inconvenience, so that's good at least. The good news is that you can now expect plus 5% performance with the new BIOS revision. We used the Asus TUF cards in our reviews, so our numbers aren't affected at all by this. However, from reports we've seen from those who have tested MSI cards, looks like it varies from 0 to 5% impact or so from this BIOS update, where 0 is on the lower load games, 5 is on the higher, so maybe you call it an average of 3 or something. Probably not enough to really change anyone's conclusion as a reviewer in most instances, but definitely worth installing if you're an actual user of it or a reviewer for future testing. Okay, NVIDIA RTX Remix goes into open beta. This is pretty interesting software. NVIDIA has officially launched its RTX Remix game modding suite. This goes into open beta, so anyone can turn Skyrim's dragons into cursed abominations with full path tracing. Half-Life 2 is another recent remake that was done with Remix, and specifically in that scenario, Remix serves to replace the renderer of the game itself, which is why it's pretty interesting software. This allows for an old title like Half-Life 2 to be upfitted with modern assets that otherwise would be incompatible with the way the base engine and game worked, because it's too old. Specifically, replacing the renderer also resolves memory usage limitations, where the game simply could not run with models above a certain size or complexity. And as a site that actually we largely got our start covering mods of games, we think Remix is a cool utility that opens the door to tons of fan-made graphics overhauls, and not just RT ones. We covered Remix when it was first announced, but to briefly recap it, Remix is part of NVIDIA's Omniverse and is a platform for changing the assets. It also allows changing of lighting, general graphics of fixed function pipelines like DX8 and 9 games. NVIDIA lists Call of Duty 2, Hitman 2 Silent Assassin, and Need for Speed Underground 2 as examples of games that fit the bill. ModDB is maintaining a list of compatible games and noting what functionality is available through Remix. At the time of writing, there are 28 games listed as playable there and 109 as partially playable. Hopefully that grows over time. NVIDIA covers Remix's basic structure in its news update as follows. Quote, Remix consists of 2 components, an application for creating lights and added remastered assets into a game scene, and a runtime for capturing classic game scenes and injecting the remastered assets back into the game at playback. This means that modders can add not only fully ray-traced lights into older games, but we think maybe more importantly, also more easily add updated models, higher poly models, higher res textures, materials, such as modern physically based assets that allow for programmable levels of shine, roughness, transparency, and so forth. An easy example of this is the lamp shown further down in the post, where the original's lampshade is completely opaque, but Remix allowed the light to shine through realistically. In order to help speed up the process of modders remastering games, NVIDIA also added generative AI tools to revamp textures. It can be used to not only upscale, but also to generate normal and roughness maps. This is obviously a massive time saver if you're a solo or small group mod project doing everything by hand, for example, to this. And assuming it works well and is consistent, then it'd be a good addition for modders. Along with the open beta release, NVIDIA is promoting Half-Life 2 RTX, an RTX Remix project. It's being worked on by 65 modders, and the video and screenshots are impressive. For another example of Remix, this is the iconic bog map in COD 4 with path tracing turned on and in the daylight. It's easy to pick apart NVIDIA for a lot of things that it does, especially the value consideration on a lot of the GPUs, the kind of meh 4070 Ti Super. But projects like this, we actually do, this kind of stuff is cool to me just because for playing PC games growing up and even until now, modding has always been kind of a core part of that experience to really make the game live longer and be fun. Any tools that help enable that, especially in a non-nefarious way, which this appears to be, they're good tools to have. So hopefully some modders can make use of this. And as stated, it's not just RT stuff, although it can be used for that, so it benefits them. But you could also use it just to replace the renderer in old things so you can get higher quality assets like models into the game. All right, Capcom broke Monster Hunter Rise on Steam Deck. Capcom's latest reasons for being in the news include its usage of Enigma DRM and also this Monster Hunter story. Earlier this month, the company added Enigma DRM to Resident Evil Revelations, among others, and this apparently broke mod compatibility and also ruined performance. The latest blunder is in Monster Hunter Rise, which relative to Resident Evil Revelations is newer, at least. Patch 16.0.2.0 switched DRM from Denuvo to Enigma. The change completely broke the game on Steam Deck and caused the verified title to not even launch. After word got back to the developer, Capcom added this to the post, quote, "There have been reports of the game not running on Steam Deck after updating to version 16.0.2.0. The dev team is currently investigating this issue. We'll let you know as soon as we find out more, so please hold on for further information. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause." As of the latest update, the company claims to have fixed the issue, Definitely inconvenient to completely break a game from a DRM update, which is already kind of frustrating, but if they had done their own thorough testing, they might have noticed that it didn't launch. It's not one of the types of flaws that's difficult to find, as long as you try to launch it on basically the most popular handheld device. OpenAI is drumming up investment funds to try and manufacture its own chips. This is pretty interesting. So according to an article on Bloomberg that we couldn't read because it's paywalled, so thanks Tom's Hardware for re-reporting it, OpenAI is seeking at least $8 to $10 billion for this venture, but that's a meager budget when it comes to top-of-the-line fabs these days. CEO Sam Altman thinks the right direction for OpenAI is to eventually break away from dependence on NVIDIA or any other company for its AI processing power. Starting up new fabs is ludicrously expensive. Intel, for example, has spent tens of billions on their newest ones, TSMC as well, so it's bound to be even more difficult for an outsider to start from scratch. This is an even more aggressive strategy than Google or Amazon or actually AMD because these companies do design their own chips. Google and Amazon may be most directly relatable here, but they don't manufacture them themselves. The plan here is likely an attempt to get ahead of any future chip shortages, to decouple some of the control that third-party fabs might have over your scheduling or your technology capabilities, and it could also theoretically help circumvent whatever future geopolitical issues might surround the various fabs that exist today, because they are relatively low availability. So it'll be interesting to see if they're successful in recruiting that investment. It's the type of thing that various governments normally also are interested in investing in because they want fabs on their turf. Up next, AMD's Fluid Motion Frames finds its way into driver updates. So big changes here where AMD is boasting upwards of 90+% change in performance. Fluid Motion Frames, as a reminder, is AMD's naming for frame generation. So it's the process of inserting or injecting additional frames to increase the frame rate with frames that are created based upon other real frame data. Now, according to AMD, this should work with, in theory, any DirectX 11 or 12 games. As for uplift, AMD claims up to 103% with 1440p or up to 97% with 1080p when using FSR2 quality and this new Fluid Motion Frames tech. AMD also explicitly states support for the RX 6000 series desktop GPUs and 700M graphics. AMD's Frank Azer tweeted the following, quote, "It's here. If you haven't tried it yet, you're missing out on huge frame rate gains across thousands of games. AMD Fluid Motion Frames, or AFMF, boosts FPS up to 97% for a smoother gaming experience by adding frame generation technology to any DX 11 and 12 game." Now, I'd like to test this. We'll see what our timing and availability is. We just did the 7600 XT. We've got the 4080 Super. And then it's public information that AMD has a bunch of CPUs coming out, so we will be reviewing probably all of those. Maybe we'll skip the least interesting one, whatever that is, but there's a lot going on already. So Fluid Motion Frames testing for us wouldn't happen until after the GPU and CPU review cycle concludes, if I'm still alive after it. Next one, and last one, there's a modder, this is super cool actually, who rebuilt a Game Boy Advance ROM by playing the audio. From basically a bug. And this is really cool. So modder known as the ZZAZZ glitch, is that Zaz? I don't know, has shown off a unique technique to dump all the data off a GBA game cartridge. The method involves recording the sound the handheld console makes when the game crashes for several hours, and then turning the noise back into code. We wanted to cover this because this is simultaneously, like, it's one of the hackiest but most impressive pieces of, I don't know, software projects we've had the opportunity to cover in news. It's really cool because it gets to the heart of just doing cool things with technology, where it's kind of educational. Like, to recover data and code from audio, it makes sense, but it's not really a common way to do things. The basic mechanism for how the dump works goes like this. The GBA sound chip is independent of the main processor, and it's capable of reading data completely on its own. Under normal conditions, the process is restricted to a small sound buffer in memory. When the game crashes, the sound chip will basically free run, and it'll just start playing the whole cartridge as audio, to the extent that when it starts hitting actual audio data, like game music, game sound effects, you'll still hear those just like you would normally hear it in the game. But then as for everything else in code, each one has a particular tone assigned to it. Since it's a sound chip, the data is indiscriminately interpreted as audio because almost all of the data isn't actually music or sound effects. Obviously, most of it comes out as kind of a garbled mess. Now, it sounds awful to the human ear, but it's actually useful because you can start reconstructing the code by taking this audio as it's code, it's just format shifted into a different format, which is audio playback. So the really cool part we'll play for you is in the middle when the glitchy noises and static are interrupted by the game's actual sound effects. A good parallel to think about this is how some old PCs, like the Commodore 64, could use cassette tapes to load games, when normally those tapes were associated with music. It's not a perfect process, so the Zaz glitch goes into details of making the process work and also proves the concept by comparing it to actual hardware and to an emulator in a more standard way, and using a well-loved Nintendo DS to produce the noise and capture it on the PC. Eventually, after days of work, the Zaz glitch stated they were able to get a functional copy of the ROM completely reborn from the pained screams of the same video game as it dies. We just wanted to add this in because it's really cool, it's fun, and it serves as a great way to illustrate how data can be transformed into many different formats, and you can do cool things with it, like recovery, for example. On top of that, normally backing up or dumping game cartridges requires things like separate purchased hardware for it, special hardware, but this one, it doesn't technically need any tools, it needs time, and that's cool in its own way. So if this interests you at all, go check out the original videos from the Zaz glitch for the full info. You could check it out on YouTube. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to support our new testing efforts with GPUs and CPUs alike, and grab one of these shirts before they are gone. We will not be restocking them. Or you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to throw us a few bucks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.